Okay, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chognam la Jangchu bardu dagni kiapsu chi Dagi jinso gibe sonam ki Drola penchir sangye drupasho Sangye chodang soki chognam la Jangchu bardu dagni kiapsu chi Dagi jinso gibe sonam ki Rola penchir sangye druparshu. The four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And those four measurable thoughts are what the Buddha Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, Chenrezig, that's what the Buddha of compassion embodies, that immeasurable love and compassion and joy and equanimity. And because we're getting into the section of Nagarjuna's text that is talking pretty extensively about wisdom, the nature of reality, and how we can develop a realization of that nature of reality. Because if we do, it's going to actually liberate us from the mistaken view we have about ourselves and all other phenomena, which is the cause of all of the troubles and the suffering that we and the rest of the world seem to be having. So this Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom. It's the Buddha that that all of the lineage masters have said the mantras for, and in some cases, like with Tsongkhapa up here was a Tibetan master, the head of the Gelug lineage. Tsongkhapa actually, after a certain point, Buddha Manjushri appeared directly to him, and he was learning from Manjushri. So we just have to open our minds a little bit to the kinds of possibilities that actually exist out there, and that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. So let's say just do some of these Manjushri mantras. The mantra goes like this: Om A Ra Pa Sa Na Di. 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 Each one of those syllables stands for a particular word, a particular aspect of the wisdom teachings of the Buddha, but we won't go into that right now. Just know that that's the case, and we'll say some of these Omarapatsanadis. And then when we come to the last repetition, then we repeat that final syllable d over and over like that. And imagine that we're sort of awakening the dependently arising nature of who we are, and that dependently arising nature can take us all the way to enlightenment, for the benefit of all beings. We can clear all of our cognitive obscurations, remove all of our afflictive emotions, as crazy as that sounds, and go all the way to enlightenment. So that's Manjushri mantra. Here we go. Om Arapat-samadi, Om Arapat-samadi, Om Arapat-samadi.
Amarata-samadi, 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 Amarata-samadi,
Lama Pasang used to tell a funny story of how before the young monks they would have tests regularly. And before they would all be, going through the hallways to the place where they take the big gompa where they take their tests, and all the young monks would be going trying to get their wisdom going. So they cramming by saying this Manjushri mantra.
I don't know. I have this theory about the DVDs. Your right and left channels, depending on how you think of it.
This is Kabila's
Are
theory.
here. This is just my personal theory. They're here.
No,
And I think DDD
It-
kind of
it's accurate.
stimulates the movement of the
Mhm.
winds through that's my working theory.
yeah.
Stimulates the movement of the winds. As it goes, the pathway is like,
Yeah, and then it goes down, and then
yeah.
if we went over this much earlier, but if you can say that mantra in conjunction with visualizing the Manjushri figure and sort of the symbolism contained in that figure, it can be over time can be quite effective. You can really actually feel an energy going and a sort of a connection to those concepts that the image the figure is symbolizing. So I think it's valuable to do. All right, now we're just going to read through the 7-limb prayer, which is on the next page, and this is a prayer which outlines the 7-limb practice, which we have
I
gone
want
over.
to interrupt because you don't mention this, and I think it's useful to always mention. The 7-limb prayer is meant to be done as it's a statement you're making to the teachers, the Buddhists and the Bodhisattvas. So it's not a freestanding, just out there in the ether,
Right.
like
Right, you're imagining that there's all there in front of you.
Object that you're saying this to.
Right, you're imagining that all the Buddhas and realized beings and Bodhisattvas are in the space in front of you as you're saying this. But we won't again go into the details of this. We'll just recite this for now. And imagine that you're saying this to the enlightened beings before you. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment, which would be the enlightenment of all beings. And then finally, we'll do this mandala offering. And here, there is a translation, continents and mountains strewn with flowers and all that. I think what's helpful for us to visualize here is to just imagine a universe where all consciousness and appearances are completely free from all afflictive emotions, completely free from ignorance, and are functioning in a very wholesome, interdependent relationship. And this is what we are making an offering to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before it. This idea that we hold. Zajivaki Jukshimeto Tramrira Lingji Nideye Badi Sangye Jindu Mide Urwagi Rokunam Dachingla Chepasho. Then we offer that into their hearts as we say, Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatai. All right.
With that offering,
Mhm.
I have found it increasingly more powerful over the years. To always be thinking what I'm actually offering is my role to generate such a purified. So it's like, because when you think that they don't need anything.
No, what we are offering is we
Our,
want to be part of
yeah,
this, yes.
we're offering our participation in
Right.
making it so.
The same goes for when we said those prayers that Chenrezig embodies. You know, the four measurables, may all sentient beings have happiness, be free from suffering. That, what we're saying there is that may we ourselves, you know, be inspired and, yeah, be basically inspired by this Buddhist path to achieve that. So we ourselves
Yeah.
will
it's
bring
not
that to all
just a
sentient
passive
beings.
wish.
Yeah.
I mean,
None of
that's-
this is passive.
Yeah, that's the
None
thing
of this is
about,
passive.
I mean, and I'm just saying this my own.
It's very easy for us to fall back
Very
into.
my own understanding.
Yeah.
Especially, being raised Catholic where you're just sort of passively praying.
Yeah, God, you take care of it, okay? It's like, we're not saying Buddhists, you take care of it. We're saying we're joining with this. We're joining in this path, you know.
There's a version of the four measurables where you go, may they, and then I will make it so.
Yeah, I will work in it with that.
I am going to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way I could reduce all this is like, instead of continuing to be part of the problem, I'm gonna reorient myself to be part of the solution.
That's what we're all aiming for. Be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Amen.
Amen, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Right? And all the people say, amen.
It's in the wrong place. Isn't it?
Oh, we're never in the wrong place. Last week, so we started going over, talking about the Buddhist sort of psychological view of the pathway to liberation from our mistaken thinking and all of our afflictive emotions and all the problems, all of that comes, brings with it. And moving through that into a pathway that removes all of those afflictive emotions, removes all of that ignorance that we've got about how things actually exist, and we become part of the solution. As Kabir was saying, we become part of the solution of benefiting all others and helping others to find that path for themselves as well. So I will go over a little bit of what we're going to talk. We're going to go more in today about the Buddha's hypothesis of, well, it's his psychological view, but within the psychological view of Buddhism, that psychological view is thoroughly interconnected with a view of the nature of reality, a view of the nature of knowledge itself, a view of the nature of existence and how things exist, the nature of being. So what we're talking about here is in psychology, these are, or in philosophy, they're things that they're called. You have psychology, which is, we understand this is about the mind and behavior and what drives us and what makes us do these things. Buddha is an expert at this, but also Buddha is an expert at what is called ontology, which is the nature of our existence, the nature of consciousness, this is how we exist. We exist because we are aware. We are aware that we exist. So this is completely tied into the Buddhist psychological view, this ontology, the nature of being, how we exist. Then there is the what's called metaphysics, which is the nature of reality. And again, this is completely tied into the Buddhist view of psychology, because what the Buddha is saying is that our consciousness, which our mind, the way we behave, all of these things we experience, our consciousness is beginningless, which then takes us into a realm that normal psychology never goes into. So right off the bat, Buddhist psychology is bringing us into, wow, the nature of the existence of consciousness. It's beginningless. It has a beginningless existence, and then it goes into why, why is there a problem? Why are we having a problem? And there the Buddha goes into the nature of reality, which is metaphysics in philosophical terms. So the nature of reality is what we need to be discovering, because we are the ignorance that we have, the ignorance of our consciousness, which is called ego self-grasping ignorance, is primordial. According to the Buddha, it is beginningless. This is our existence. So we have to understand then the nature of reality in order to get our psychology to a place where it's working in a healthy way. And this, to understand the nature of reality, we need to understand the nature of knowledge, the nature of wisdom. What is wisdom? And the Buddha talks about this, and it's all part of the Buddha's psychological view of how we exist. So it covers a lot. It covers a lot, and that's what we're talking about. We talked about last week, which began, and we'll continue with that today. And what I said last week is it's helpful if we just take all of this as a hypothesis. Sort of like what a hypothesis does is it takes for the purposes of argument, we'll take something and say that this thing is so, and then we test this theory against certain kinds of valid what would you call it, valid criteria, to see if that theory sort of makes sense, if it holds up. And that's, so what we do is we kind of throw out belief or disbelief. And we're just looking at the hypothesis and saying to ourselves as we examine it, does this make sense given a certain set of criteria? So what we talked about,
Maybe a better way to say that is, does this hold up to logical analysis? Does this make sense? It's kind of subjective.
yeah, but sense in terms of
Can be.
sense in terms of logical
That could be your
analysis,
definition of what makes
but that
sense.
logic has to be based on something valid.
Yeah. So,
Whatever
I mean,
we
in
consider
terms
valid.
of clarifying
Yeah.
how you say it, does it stand up to valid analysis?
Right.
Or something like that. On my.
Yeah, so what we're trying to see is what the Buddha is saying, are the concepts the Buddha is putting forth, are these, can we say these are valid? Can we say that it's accurate, or can we see, oh no, there's error here, there's definitely error here. So it requires logic, it requires using our logic when we're talking about these concepts and examining them and debating about them and thinking about them. So what we talked about last week was that the Buddha's expertise is psychology. It's all the Buddhist path is all about the mind, how it functions, the behavior of the mind, what causes the mind, what causes our consciousness to become clouded and experience frustration and suffering and anger and all of the things that we experience. So we talked about that's what the Buddha's expertise is. Then we went into the Buddha's very first teachings, which are called the Four Noble Truths. And what I explained last week is the Four Noble Truths aren't things that are true for ordinary beings. They're true for what are called noble beings. Noble beings, in Sanskrit, the word is Arya, A-R-Y-A is how it's transliterated, Arya, an Arya being. And what that means is somebody who has had a direct realization and understanding of the nature of reality. That's what an Arya being is. We haven't achieved that yet. So when the Buddha laid out these four truths, these were truths for beings that have had a direct realization and understanding of what the nature of reality is. So for them, this is true. So the first one we talked about was suffering, and we all experience suffering from, last week we discussed minor frustration to intense rage. It's all there. It's all there just waiting for the trigger to, bring that out in us. what we need to think about is, well, what causes that? What causes that suffering? And that is the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. Now, Arya beings see suffering for what it is. They see it exactly for what it is. Or us ordinary beings, we do not see that. We do not see suffering for exactly for what it is. We mistake what we think of as something we want, something we desire. We mistake that as being something good and desirable, when in fact, they can always be, because of our ego self-grasping, they are always very subtle levels of suffering. For instance, this is just one example. You can think of anything. One example, you're looking, you need a job, right? And you want a really good career, something that's going to be very meaningful to you. And so you see this particular job that you're going after, and you're going, all right, if I get this job, I'm going to get this job. I'm going to be happy. It's going to, really make this huge difference in my life, and everything's going to come together and things will be great. This is what we do. We look at something, we see it as the source out there of what's going to cause us to be happy, to be successful, for everything to be okay. And we go after that thing, we get that thing, and every time, without fail, unless we have some wisdom, that turns into suffering for us. We can't stand our boss, we can't stand our coworkers, we think the whole place is screwed up, it needs to be fixed, it's a mess, and we get into all of these entanglements just in our careers with people we work with, which causes, eventually it makes us leave the place and go searching somewhere else for that thing that's going to make everything okay. So this is the nature of suffering that we don't see. Ordinary beings don't see it. Beings who have realized what the actual nature of reality is see it exactly for what it is. So this is what we're trying to work on and discover for ourselves. So then we go into the cause or the origin of this suffering. And this is where we were leaving off last week. And the origin of suffering, the Buddhist said, has to do with primordial ignorance. Again, when we're talking primordial, we're talking beginningless. So right into the psychology of the ego, the Buddha is throwing beginningless time, which is, we're talking about the nature of reality here. We're talking about, the nature of being and the metaphysics and all of that kind of stuff. So we have to look at this. So we looked at this primordial ego self-grasping. And just if I could explain it quickly again, the ego, what happens is, we as a being, as a consciousness, think of ourselves, we think of ourselves as me, as I. We have this idea, it's an idea, it's a feeling, it's a sense that me, exists as a being, as some kind of sense of being, I and me. And that I and me is unchangeable. I am always me, I will always be me. Me and I does not change. Me and I is something distinct from everything else. Me and I is different from all the other me and I's and all the other phenomena out there. It's quite distinct. So, and Buddha is saying this is primordial. So what happens is we develop this sense of an ego that goes along with the me and my, that's very attached to that me and mine. Me and mine and I. And when we look out at other things that we see in what we think of as our external reality. What was that quote you gave last week before we ended? It was from Harry Potter. What was that quote? It's perfect.
Is this really happening, or is it all in my mind? And
Right.
Dumbledore says, or is this real, or is it just happening in my mind? And Dumbledore says, of course it's happening in your mind, but why would that make it any less real?
There you go. That is what has happened with the ego. The ego thinks that everything what it thinks of as distinct and external from itself is the real world out there. Whereas according to the Buddha, in fact, it is occurring at the level of consciousness. And just as Dumbledore said, what makes you think that that's not real? Why do we think that's not real? But we do. And so what the, yes,
Could you use independent instead of distinct?
right,
Because distinct.
we're getting there, we're getting there, so
I
that,
think
so,
independence is more,
so the ego sees itself as independently self-existent. In that sense, being distinct and separate from everything else out there, and look at our experience.
but I think independence is the,
Independent, right, independently self-existent, as, not as, we know that we're not independently self-existent in terms of our body, we know we have to eat, we know we depend on things. The thing that we think is independently self-existence is this sense of me. Me is independently self-existent. And so because of that, the way we view everything, and we can just look at our experience, it appears to us as if everything else is also independently self-existent. Sort of like everything's encapsulated in an existence of its own, like a little bubble. Everything's in its own bubble of itself, its own thing. This is the way the ego mind thinks, and this is the primordial ignorance the Buddha is talking about. And this primordial ignorance looks out at what it appears to be external reality because it sees itself as separate from it and independent from it. It feels as if it is lacking and needs what's out there in order to alleviate its sense of lack. So the ego then develops this grasping after things. I need this, I need this, I have to have this, I need this. And look at our experience, we do this all the time. And what happens is if we get that thing, it satisfies us temporarily, but then we think, I need more of that. I need more. I have to have more. And this is how addiction starts. And addiction, of course, goes downhill. And addiction causes suffering. So this self-grasping causes suffering. The other way that it causes suffering is that the ego will look out at what it sees as the real world existing out there, and looking for the things it wants and needs and desires. And when something gets in the way of that, whatever that, it could be a person, it could be an object, it could be anything. Something gets in the way of that, of what the ego thinks it needs and wants, then the ego develops what is generally called an aversion towards that thing. I don't like that. That's in my way. It quickly can escalate to levels of real anger, hatred, jealousy, attack, rage, murder, you name it. It just keeps going and going and going because the ego wants to destroy the thing that is in its way. And this also causes suffering. We know this, it's quite clear. And this is what the mistaken view that Buddha is talking about, this mistaken view of independent, self-existing I and me and mine, is causing all of this trouble. And he said this is primordial. So then we have to look at, well, what does the Buddha say? Buddhism is always talking about beginningless time. So we need to look at that concept because we have a very tough time wrapping our head around the idea of beginningless time. So last week I posed, I think it was 2 or 3 questions that I had come up with, and
why does it need to be?
why does there need to be why does there need to be a first cause? Because we think there has to be a first cause. It can't be beginningless. Something has to have set all of this into motion. So the question we need to ask, and it's not an illogical question. You know, we have to ask ourselves, why does there need to be a first cause? Is that necessary? And we went through that last week, and we really couldn't come up with an answer why there needs to be a first cause. The second question was, if there is a first cause, how did it get there? Did it just pop into being, or did something else cause it? So logically, you're going, well, okay, well, if something else caused it, then that first cause actually can't be a first cause. That first cause have to be caused by something else, and that something else can't have been a first cause either, which brings us back to this idea of, well, then maybe what we're talking about first cause is something like a beginningless, infinite first cause, beginningless first cause. So we kind of left it there. And now I want to continue on that. We continue on that track and we'll go deeper. And I think somebody did bring this up last week, and they talked about, well, what about God? You know, is God the beginningless first cause? So in Buddhism, Buddhism, if nothing else, Buddhist teachers, particularly Venerable Robina, is a stickler for clarifying our terms, because if we do not clarify our terms, if we're fuzzy in what our terms are, then we are not clear ourselves when we're communicating with one another, and our communication becomes fuzzy and it's not clear. We project onto a particular term kind of what we think it is, and somebody else projects onto that term what they think it is. Nothing could be truer than the word God in terms of that. What people project onto that term. So we need to clarify that term before we start talking from the Buddhist perspective, if God is the beginningless infinite cause. So I went to the dictionary. Okay, I went to Merriam-Webster. And here is the very first heading. God, the supreme or ultimate reality. Leave it right there and not go to the subheadings, because the subheadings go down all these various pathways that we're all familiar with. But the first definition is God, the supreme or ultimate reality. Buddhism has no problem whatsoever with that definition. None. God.
What you mean is Buddhism can agree that such a thing.
Yeah, God, the word God in
Yeah,
English
I mean,
is merely a term. It's a label. It's a name. It's a name that is standing for or symbolizing beginningless. The ultimate, supreme, ultimate reality. And Buddhism definitely, most definitely asserts a supreme, ultimate reality, an ultimate reality. So I want to talk a little bit about this and see if we can get our heads around it.
You have to define what ultimate reality you're.
Ultimate reality. It is what is real. You take it to the limit of what is real, that's what it is.
Yeah, so maybe I'm preempting some of your conversation.
Please.
No, I mean, so, there's two interesting things. There's this anti-Darwinian evolutionary movement now that argues that based on Darwinian evolution principles, that the things that we see, including major changes in evolution, couldn't just happen due to pure evolution. So they invoke God as the ultimate arbitrator of major shifts, like Panda's thumb. So you have this major change in a relatively short period of time historically, and that's too short for evolution. But the other bigger thing that puzzles me is this concern, at least it's my concern for me, that I don't know that I have the knowledge, insight, capacity to actually understand whether or not these thoughts, principles, ideas are actually true or not. And I'm maybe I didn't say that quite correctly, but we have a concept of what we think, and we can believe ultimate reality is, there's no independent existence and emptiness, and we can agree with all those things, and that may be true. But we agree with it because we are attracted to that idea. We've logicked out that idea, but maybe we're not capable of logicking out deeply enough or thoroughly enough to see that there is other possibilities, we can't get
Right.
there.
Right, and that again, Brian, is the reason we can't get there has to do with ignorance of what's causing that. And
Well,
we have
But I
to,
think
we have
I
to
said it
find
was-
out the
Right, I
cause.
said it was for me, but I would argue that maybe all of
yeah,
sentient beings are faced with this same challenge.
Of course,
can I,
of course we are.
can I sort of see if I get what you're saying? Are you saying in a way that due to the information that we absorbed throughout our existence and our understanding of things has created a certain paradigm and a lens through which we can examine things. And that paradigm lens that we think is so high and mighty, because we, let's say we've got 4 PhDs and traveled the universe and seen everything and study. Nonetheless, that paradigm and that lens may be insufficient to be able to observe and see and apprehend accurately ultimate reality.
Yes, I would say that's close. I would say the other piece of it, which I didn't necessarily articulate, but this is again, and I'll use my own background as a scientist here, I look for affirming data. So I look for positive evidence that something exists. Now, I know in science, actually, when we do a lot of research, we actually don't find it positive, right? I mean, we don't find data we can publish because everybody only wants to publish positive data and, new findings. We found, oh, that's wrong. That didn't work out. I mean, we never hear about it.
Yeah.
But I know that happens more often than
Yes.
anybody wants
Right.
to admit, right? That's reality. I
Mhm.
mean, that is part of
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
So I think, in the other concept, and again, you can logic this out. And I would agree with the logic process of logicking this out, that there is no other way you can come at the end of the day to how things ultimately exist, except from the concept of beginningless time. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Then I go back to
Sure.
this other concern I have that, at least for me, I don't feel like I'm smart enough to know if I've really been able to logic it out thoroughly
Yeah.
enough that I haven't considered all possibilities. And,
Well, yeah,
and,
because
and
there's,
it's something that you said, this ego we have is primordial. That has existed since beginningless time. Well, so has ultimate reality existed since beginningless time. And I just see this continued battle between ego and ultimate reality. And even though ego is very strong, and I get all of the things you were saying before, I'm still puzzled as to why we've chosen to go down this path of ego instead of saying, yeah, ultimate reality is this, and if we follow that, we all be, better off.
mhm, mhm,
Anyways,
I'm not sure
yeah,
the Buddha puts it in terms of when you're talking about beginningless ignorance. I'm not sure the Buddha talks about it as being a choice. What the Buddha talks about as being a choice ultimately for us is through questioning, basically questioning. We start to change our mind about what the possibilities may be for us. And that then leads to a pathway that can take you out of this ignorance. And because the Buddha, every Buddha starts with beginningless ignorance. It's not like they start out as an enlightened being. They don't. That's not what the Buddha's story was. He explained exactly what happened. He was ignorant like the rest of us. Beginningless ignorance, cycling through this beginningless ignorance over and over and over again until finally, through enough suffering, I guess you'd say, enough knocks, hard knocks, and banging your head against the wall and going, this is not working. There's got to be something else. Questioning begins to arise of, is there another way that I could be viewing my existence? And through that, because what ultimately is the nature of existence is that everything is a dependent arising. Now, the Buddha doesn't put it in those, Buddha doesn't put it in that affirmative way. The Buddha puts it in a negative. The Buddha says, the reality is that everything is lacking or absent or empty of what we think of as this independent self-existence. Everything is empty of that. Through that negative itself then affirms, well, then it must be the opposite. It must be dependently arising and constantly moment to moment doing that. So there's this, so what that brings into it is everything is moment to moment changing, constantly changing, being subjected to causes and conditions and evolving, you might say, but not evolving into some self-independent thing, but just continually evolving, continually in this process of evolving. A Buddha is continually, is an impermanent thing. A Buddha is impermanent. A Buddha is constantly changing, which is why a Buddha there can be interaction. We can get the knowledge. We can.
Right, but none of that, it seems to me, I know you want to say something, Brian.
Yeah, no,
None of that seems to me to require beginningless time. You're always talking about Buddha's evolving, everything's dependent origination, everything's changing. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, and.
Go back though,
but-
go back to the questions. Why? What makes more sense? What is more logical?
Right.
First
Again,
cause, one cause started everything, or it's just beginningless causes. What makes more logical sense?
well,
That's
to
what
me,
you have to
it's-
ask.
To me, it's a hard thing to come to grips with, I guess.
well, and this, I gotta say this because I can hear Geshe Drachma screaming and many of my other teachers, I mean, you know him better, but I think one of the things that I have heard over and over again is this, we can only really get this stuff if we develop shamatha. If we
Yeah, right, that concentration.
that we have got to, it is not until we put our butts on the mat and work our way through those stages and the metaphor of our minds are like shaky flames, you know, and until that gets steady, it will illuminate these questions, a lot of these questions that like right now we just can't like, I don't know, beginningless time, because like, I can imagine that's what a lot of the teachers would say, right?
Excellent,
Like,
excellent point you're making there, because that is where Nagarjuna is going as we move into this next section.
okay,
There are two different kinds of cognition that we have, and I won't go too much into this, but one of them is what Brian is talking about. It is a state of mind that is shamatha, single point
Single-pointed
concentration, calm abiding, where the mind is completely focused. And when the mind is completely focused, it's a different kind of cognition than our ordinary mind, which is constantly like the flickering flame, moving in the wind, distracted by everything that's going around, questioning, you know, making mistakes, all this kind of thing. There are two types of cognition that we're talking about. And the cognition that's going to get us to a clear understanding and realization of what the Buddha is saying is this cognition where the mind can become completely focused. And that's rare for us, very rare for us to be able to do that.
We don't.
We have to have, number one, we have to have the motivation to do that. We have to have a reason under our butt that says, why would I want to spend this time to do this with my mind? What are the benefits? What am I going to get out of it?
and I think that, and the reason I say that is that I think that's a struggle that certainly we as scientists have a lot, because it's like, that's not a part of the scientific method, to sit and develop that state of mind as a way of directly perceiving things that we rely on instruments and experimentation and stuff. And so there's kind of Yeah, you have to develop that desire to do that and hope. Or some kind of faith that is, or you won't even try, but
Okay.
yeah.
This again goes back to logic, Brian. Now,
Yeah.
here's something that I would venture to say, most science, except for neuroscience, doesn't even take into account. And what Buddha says is at the very basis of reality. The foundational of reality has to do with consciousness itself. Whereas in science, takes a very objective view of everything and is measuring and studying and doing experiments on what appears to be out there, but not taking into account the consciousness that is behind it all. The quote that Brian gave from Harry Potter, not taking into account that why is consciousness not as real as what seems to be appearing to us out there. Consciousness has, according to Buddhism, has everything to do with how things appear to us. Everything. You cannot. It's almost laughable that scientists will be discussing the nature of the universe and the origin of the universe and all these things, but never take consciousness into the equation of it. That it's all, let's just objectively study all of it and we'll figure out, look at the particles and not the only thing that's starting to take consciousness into account is you get into physics, quantum physics, neuroscience, those kinds of physics, and they're beginning to see, whoa, our consciousness is having a direct effect on this, which I'm going to get into.
I think Schrodinger's cat was like maybe an early echo of this sort of like,
Can you explain that? Do you remember it? Can you explain it?
not really.
Does anybody know that?
There was
You know this, Schrodinger's?
particles going through a hole and.
Yeah, Brian, I think, yeah,
So
Kevin.
that's the origin of the thought experiment that they found that light can be both a wave and a particle. Based on which instrument you use to observe light. So they translated that into Schrodinger's cat is dead or alive when you open the box, depending upon who opens it. Which kind of leads into a question that I had, Christopher, and that is, if everything is subject to change, nothing is concrete, least of which we have talked about using the term ultimate reality as something concrete.
It sounds so concrete, doesn't it?
It sounds like if we could just all develop a sophisticated enough consciousness that understanding ultimate reality would be, or ultimate reality as some sort of concrete thing would be revealed to us. And this is where where terminology starts.
I know, and this is why the clarification of terms.
Seeing that concrete, this.
We do that with everything. We concretize everything. Another word they use is reify. We reify or concretize everything. It's in our primordial ignorant nature to do that because we've reified and concretized I and me. The funny thing about ultimate reality from the Buddhist definition is ultimate reality is emptiness. It's nothing you can even grasp. It's nothing you can concretize or hold on to or reify. It's an empty of, everything is empty of any kind of independent self-existent nature.
Okay, fair, go back to your original, at the beginning of your talk today about we have a hypothesis that we work with. So let's take that as the hypothesis we work with. Does that then suggest that there is some ultimate level of consciousness that is concretized that allows us to see emptiness?
No, there's never a concretized consciousness because that's not even in the nature of what consciousness is.
So there are multiple ways to realize the idea of emptiness.
Emptiness is, how would we put this? Yes, there are not even multiple, infinite ways that emptiness is realized. Infinite.
That is realized or observed, or is that the same?
Well, it's the same thing, observed.
Okay.
Because every single object we see, all the way down to every single subatomic particle, is empty of any kind of independent self-existence. So there's an emptiness that
It's the motive.
goes with everything. It is not a concrete thing, emptiness. It's not, see, this is one of the things they talk about in Buddhism, that we make our egos make the wrong assumption then that emptiness must be a thing out there, that emptiness must have some kind of independent self-existence of its own, where that's not even what the term emptiness is trying to convey.
One term they use sometimes, some translations will use suchness.
Suchness is even better because you don't know what the hell that means. What do you mean
Yeah.
suchness? It's like you can't even concretize that.
That's what it's used.
But so I guess to further that question, right, I can't use a light meter to register sound, right? That's the wrong equipment
Right,
for me to measure sound.
right.
So there's, I'm gonna presume that the measurement device here is our consciousness to recognize emptiness, right?
Mhm.
Which in my mind then suggests that there is some ultimate state of consciousness that we all aspire to, that we arrive at to be able to experience emptiness.
That we actually already have. That it already exists. We're not recognizing it.
I disagree with that.
No, that's the ultimate-
It's a something to be developed. Going.
The realization of it is something to be developed.
No,
The awareness.
well,
The awareness of it is something to be developed. But
Well,
we
that's
are,
something
we
we-
are empty of independent self-existence already.
No,
okay, well, you said the consciousness that can apprehend emptiness already exists, and I say, no, it doesn't. 'Cause if
Did I put
did,
it that way?
no.
You said we already do have it.
We already are empty is what I'm saying. Consciousness itself is already empty of inherent existence. We just have to realize it.
All right, and this gets back to Ryan Bale's point that until you develop single pointed concentration through hours and hours of meditation on a single object. Until you achieve that, in a way, all you can do is poke around at ideas.
But we have to poke around at ideas right now.
Yes.
But.
Otherwise, we will never sit on that cushion and do
I
it.
was gonna say,
Scientific method.
one thing we don't do in this, in our sessions ever is engage in that. Single pointed concentration practice. And maybe that's something to address because not all of us are necessarily doing anything at home on our own. But it's meant to be done on your own, and then I know in our lineage, we almost never did single pointed concentration, except for when we took that course years and years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying,
Right.
it's like we're talking about something that we need a particular tool for, we need a light meter and all we have is. A wrench and we need to have
But-
some kind of format for developing the light meter.
Yeah, but to your point,
That you.
and I do think you're, again, I can't, and a lot of this is more sort of explicitly, there's all kinds of words for this. Especially in Dzogchen but there's a prayer called the prayer of, well, it's Vajradhara, Kuntu Sangpo.
Mhm.
Where they talk about this, it's the ground of being, this like the way things are basically, and it just is. We are unmind, and I keep coming back, was it AJ, is that his name?
Ajay, yeah.
Ajay, where I think he was hitting closest to it when he said it's constantly there, it's just we are unmindful of it, we're not, but I think we need that tool to develop that level of mindfulness and awareness to see it directly.
Mhm.
That, yeah.
And the tool, yes, the tool is the tool. What I would say about that is without the proper preparation.
Yeah.
Of the like what we're talking about now. That tool will not, our mind will not understand it. Our mind will not.
Consciousness trade school.
It's like consciousness trace. We have to go through these basics first and see the logic of it.
Yeah.
If our mind, our consciousness doesn't see the logic of it and the necessity of shamatha, single pointed concentration as a tool, we won't do it. We just won't do it. We'll go, this is boring and nothing's happening. I'm just gonna go have lunch. Yeah. You know, that's what we do. You know, you can sit there forever and nothing happens.
But again, and I hate to be
No.
obstinate about this.
Oh, no, be obstinate, I love it.
Even if you develop single pointed meditation to the point where you can focus your mind on this thing, you have spent multiple lifetimes working toward this single logic model of what ultimate reality is and how things exist and all this kind of stuff. How does anyone know, including all those that have come before us, that that actually is correct? Because, you know, Jim Jones convinced a lot of people
Sure.
that what he thought was correct was
Mhm.
correct, and their minds were, you know, modified in a way that said, "Oh yeah, I buy into this drinking Kool-Aid stuff or whatever." And that's a bad analogy. I don't mean it in anything,
No,
but
No.
but I, you know, that's the question I was trying to get at to begin with, is how does anyone know, including the High Lamas, the yogis, the monks, the Buddhas, how does anybody know that this is, we've reasoned as much as we can, we think as hard as we can, we practice on this, and we keep telling ourselves we're moving down this path, by the way, over multiple lifetimes, so we're building in our own conscious biases or unconscious biases in this process. How do we really say, yeah, this is it?
It's through our own experience of it. Now, we haven't had that experience. So how can we say? But
I
it
would
is,
say that if you had the experience, Chris, or you believe it for sure.
I trust it.
Oh, trust it.
I can't say that I believe it until I experience it myself. Then I will know it, but just I trust the Buddha's teachings that I've looked at so far and practiced so far, because I can see the transformation that it's made in me, in my own mind. I can definitely, tangibly experience that. So through my own experience, that is what gives me trust that what the Buddha says is trustworthy, because I've seen in these little steps that I've taken some very major changes that occur in my experience. And so for each one of us, for the Buddha himself, it had to come down to a very personal transformational experience. And you know,
I mean,
we haven't talked about a particular thing that I think sort of becomes the methodology to develop the tool, and essentially, when you develop this particular kind of consciousness tool, then perhaps these questions are resolved in a satisfactory way in increasingly more profound levels, let's say. And that is one thing that our teachers have told us, is we need to spend some time, whatever it takes, to develop single pointed concentration. So if you haven't been familiarized with the process, we've got a couple of copies of a book to do so. But once you start to develop that stable ability, literally to focus on, what they do is have you generate a mental image. So let's say, you know, it's a flame. Once you've got that and you can hold that literally for as long as you like, they say 4 hours is when, once you can hold that image for 4 hours. Can you imagine holding stably without any interruption something for 4 hours? But that's what they say. Okay, so you know, some of the teachers that we know, I think, have done this. And then once you have achieved that, what they say you do, and you'll be familiar, you then unite it with analysis, and that completely focused consciousness sets its object as the conclusion of an analysis. Let's say, for example, what is emptiness, and they call this thing special insight. So special insight ultimately would be, none of us, I mean, I have no idea, but I think that's the tool, or perhaps the Rosetta Stone for this discussion, this special insight. Which I think we're in a stage where we're, as Chris was pointing out, developing the motivation to really want to do that hard work, because takes a lot of, it takes commitment. You have to do it consistently and repeatedly, day after day after day, some time of your day. But anyways, so in our lineage, that's what they say, you gotta develop special insight.
Yeah.
That completely stable mind with,
Right, and I had a
Correct.
teacher explain it as. Literally as that you're developing, you're building the microscope, your mind is the microscope, and then you take the slide. Of
Good enough.
Nagarjuna's arguments, logical argument, but until you've got that developed, then that when you bring those two together. This stuff starts to make a lot of sense experientially, you begin to see it directly, experience it directly. In a way that we can only sort of logically now.
Right, and that's what
kick around.
that's what they train us to do, is to use our logic, which is what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
What I would say.
Because compassion needs to be the reason you're doing all of this, I just want to throw that.
Right, but that comes in under the whole heading of everything is dependently rising.
Sure.
What I would say about your question, Brian, is that none of us, we don't know what we don't know. We can't, from the position of ignorance, we cannot say, I don't see the proof. We can't do that because we don't know what we don't know until we have the experience for ourselves, and then we know it. We absolutely know it's something. That's when we can be, very solid, very secure in our conviction that this is so.
And this is why teachers are so important, because it's like, do I understand what Einstein taught? No, like I have no clue. Do I trust him or other scientists or my math teacher in middle school? No, really, because I had no experience of the truth of any of that. So there's a certain amount of, I guess, for lack of a better word, faith or logical
Buddhism called it
belief.
faith, based on law.
But
Yeah.
Buddhism relies heavily on that faith should be founded in some.
Yeah, it's not
logic
blind
that,
faith.
hey, this person seems to have done the work, seems to have, put in the hours, So I'm guessing maybe they have more experience than we do, then that allows you to. But that applies also with just, when we go to school.
It
Right?
applies to everything, really.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Should.
that you learn.
I mean, the
So-
Buddha himself said, don't trust my word for it. Don't trust what I'm telling you. You test this out for yourself. Just the same way that you would, apparently the way you would test for a piece of gold. You do everything you can to find out, is this truly gold?
Right.
And that's what the Buddha said.
Right, I agree completely.
Yeah.
But maybe, and again, I'm just being an asshole. The devil.
Yeah, but it's an asshole that's
No,
empty of
no,
inherent
that's good.
existence.
Yes,
Do we
exactly.
have the right
Do we
tools?
have the right
I don't
tools?
think we
Yeah,
do.
even did Buddha have the right tools to analyze this thoroughly? And he did it. I spent 6 years wandering around, not eating, starving, and I finally came to, this is enlightenment, this is emptiness, this is, this is how everything is. That's what I think. Yeah, I'm teaching it to all of you. You can look at it, decide for yourself, oh, that's fine. And again, don't get me wrong, I believe in the philosophy. I think it's a great philosophy and a great practice, so I have nothing negative to say about it. I live in a world now where there is no truth anymore.
We all do.
But we've lived in this world, whether we like to understand it or believe it or not, since beginningless time.
Right.
And that's the concern. Even algebra, it's a convention.
Yeah.
We have conventionally developed a
Right.
structure to
Right.
communicate. A language or
But it
model, whatever.
works.
Well, it works because it's a set
Right.
of rules
And-
that everybody's agreed
Well,
to.
because we.
And
defined it.
Buddha always, and what Buddha said over and over and over, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. So ultimately, right, that's what we're after. I mean,
Right.
aside from all the philosophical questions, the logical questions is that we want to suffer.
The Buddha talked actually
Does that make it?
quite a lot about conventional reality. conventional reality and ultimate reality go together. Like ramble on a ding a ding stop. I mean, they can't. They cannot.
That says a lot about your audience.
I don't know, it just popped into my head. We go together. Whenever you look, conventional reality is extremely important.
Sure.
It is the way we can actually function, the way things,
Right.
how we can communicate, relate, it all has to do with conventional reality. In every subatomic particle of conventional reality, there you're going to find ultimate reality as well. The emptiness of any kind of independently self-existent nature. And so there are two kinds of cognitions. A cognition that sees, or that experiences, I should say, ultimate reality. That particular cognition is the one we've got, conventional reality. That particular conventional reality cognition, we're using that right now. We're all using that. We are aware of conventional reality. There's another cognition. That cognition and conventional reality, that cognition cannot cognize emptiness. It cannot. It's incapable of. So there's another cognition, which we're talking about when we're talking about the single pointed, what you achieve, what you can get to through the single pointed concentration, or Mahamudra, or Dzogchen, or all of these various techniques. That cognition cognizes emptiness directly, but cannot cognize conventional reality. So those two cognitions, one works for ultimate reality, one works for conventional reality. Conventional reality and ultimate reality are always joined, as I said. So the only time that those two cognitions come together, like in a stereo view, is when one attains enlightenment, when one has removed what are called all of the cognitive obscurations that exist in the consciousness. What our first job is to remove the afflictive obscurations through the techniques. So we're talking about our anger, fear, hatred, jealousy, all these afflictive emotions we have. Through the techniques that the Buddha has taught, we remove those. We complete and we work on those. That's the first job. That is the first level of practice, which we must do, because this other cognition is never, ever going to arise in us until we can do that and sort of settle all of that down. So they do eventually, in enlightenment, they do come together so that a Buddha not only sees cognizes conventional reality, but at the same time cognizes ultimate reality with it.
I'll be quiet.
That's what the Buddha said.
These
Tough.
sessions aren't core,
Yeah.
otherwise we keep building this thing on top of
We cannot build a
a
faulty.
teetering foundation.
We cannot build a house with a faulty foundation, we've got to talk about these things.
You're supposed to open your mind,
Supposed to just,
and you realize things that you can't normally see in.
Yeah.
apparently,
But-
if we
But
get
Rob,
down with a.
Yeah, it's much quicker.
Oh, yeah, no, and I've actually, and you've probably heard stories of Tibetan monks that have done that, and I can't remember who it was, and he described it, and they described him as basically just sat there. Whenever it came down off the trip, it was kind of like, okay, that was interesting, that was like, but it's less stable.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot of negatives.
And the thing about
But-
somebody who just randomly or takes drugs or goes on goes into hyperspace with whatever
Right.
drug they're using now to do that, they're not bringing any kind of wisdom into it with them. So they're just having these,
Motivation.
or motivation. They just want the experience,
No, I get
thinking that the experience is going to bring the
I'm
wisdom.
speaking of a fun-hearted comment.
You are right. Everybody wants a shortcut.
Well, I just want to gain more insight. That's what I want, is more insight, more understanding. That's what I want. That's what I'm striving for always.
So we start with logic.
I get it. I mean, I'm not arguing any
I
of
think,
this.
well, I said something similar to Geshe Nima, I need Baba, and he said, well, that you have. The more merit you accrue, in other words, the more goodness the more merit.
The more you clear up the
deeper your
disturbances,
insight will grow. He said those two move in tandem.
we
The
must,
insight is led by the quote merit.
we must clear up the disturbances in our mind. The disturbances that come from all of our afflictive emotions and our
And
grasping and our, neediness and, and there are, we have the techniques to do that.
It's funny how we, Venerable Ravina talks about this, how we always get ahead of ourselves. We're having this topic, which was suggested by Geshe Nima, so he probably anticipated knowing us, because he knows all of us pretty well. No, sort of. He knew that we would do
We
this.
knew we'd get here.
But I'm finding, and I just, one last thing I'll say, I promise. My motivation to develop single pointed concentration has really grown in the last year. Not that I'm spending much time on it, because I'm really frustrated by not having the tool. And the tool and to put it more simply, I'm frustrated that I don't know how to actually help the various people in my lives who need help. And I think, wow, I wish I was clairvoyant. I wish I was, to put it that way, anyway.
Yeah. But clairvoyance without settling down our disturbances, our
Yeah.
emotions can be quite
Yeah.
a
So the
problem.
whole package of,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
why they always give it to us with conduct and you.
Okay, back to God.
Sorry.
Not to get mundane or anything. Okie dokie, all right, so Buddhism. Again, these are my thoughts here. Buddhism definitely asserts ultimate reality. It is a reality in which all consciousness, space, time, energy, particles, matter, fields, laws of nature, and realms of existence continually arise moment to moment. It is an ultimate reality, which is uncreated and without beginning, uncorrupted and without stain, does not die and is not reborn, and can neither be gained nor lost. It simply always is. Now, those little last lines I read,
Sounds familiar.
that is the Omarapatanadi. That's what the Omarapatanadi, the mantra is saying. I'll read it again. What it's saying is, ultimate reality is uncreated, without beginning, uncorrupted, without stain, does not die, is not reborn, and can neither be gained nor lost. It simply always is. So when you read this definition, God, the supreme or ultimate reality, you go, oh, okay. I mean, the God is just it's three letters, it's a term, it's a label put to stand for that particular definition, that meaning,
According to the dictionary.
according to that dictionary definition.
Tell that
There-
to a fundamentalist. Christian.
Kavita, I'm saying, this is why I'm saying, in terms of our practice, the clarifications of terms are extremely important. It's extremely important in Buddhism to clear all of this up so that we don't have confusion about, are you saying that that guy in the sky, living in whatever the universe it is, who has a beard and, that's what that is talking about? No, that definition does not say anything about that. Just says supreme or ultimate reality. So, the name or label that the Buddha gives to supreme or ultimate reality is shunyata, which is Sanskrit for emptiness. Emptiness is the label that the Buddha puts onto that particular definition and what that label stands for. It stands for the same definition as this label God in this particular definition. Emptiness means, and we've talked about this already, that all phenomena are empty of having an independent self-existent nature. There is no functioning thing. Think about it. No functioning thing that has an independent, self-existent nature. In order to function, for anything to function, it has to be able to interact with other things. If it cannot do that, it is functionless, it's frozen. So anything that functions has to have that nature that's empty of being independently self-existent. Phenomena continually, moment to moment, arise into existence, dependent upon causes and conditions. Dependent arising allows for all causes and conditions to assemble, for all effects to occur, for all functioning phenomena to exist, and for the engagement of every kind of relationship. Still, again, think about this in terms of a definition, just say use God to stand for all of this. In other words, you could still, and there may be people who want to do this, you could still follow the Buddhist path, but have faith in what you call God. It just is how we frame it, how we define it. And that is up to us. If we define something incorrectly, whose fault is that? We have to use our logic. This definition is making logical sense to me. When we observe just the world that we are aware of, we can see, this is actually true. Things actually do have a dependently arising nature. You can't really grasp and pin anything down when you begin to. The levels of observation that you can get into are pretty astounding. Just on a conventional level, it will blow your mind. It has blown my mind. Just to start to actually look at any object and begin to see all the causes and conditions and dependent arisings, including my own consciousness and what I'm projecting onto an object. Everything that goes into making an object appear to us the way that it does. And when we understand that it appears to us the way it does because of dependent arising, we begin to loosen our hold on this idea that it's somehow encapsulated in its own little independent, self-existent entity. It just isn't like that at all. And we must take consciousness into the equation of all of this. Science needs to put consciousness smack dab in the middle of the equation of reality and what exists. Because without consciousness, scientists couldn't even function. There would be no science. Science could not exist without consciousness, and yet it's not taken into account the way it should be. It's not looked at as the essential element of the universal reality that we should be looking at, that we should be discussing, that we should be examining. This is what the Buddha has done. The Buddha is very much like a scientist. It's a science of consciousness, the science of the mind. In Buddhism, mind and consciousness are synonymous. Mind does not mean the brain. Brain is a matter, it's an organ, through which the mind and consciousness can function. So I think one of the things we have to look at is really look at the importance of examining consciousness. And where do we start? But with our own, because that's what we've got. That's what we've got. Our experience is everything. Well, I think in the next paragraph, I say this. If phenomena were not empty of independent self-existence, if all things were truly independent and self-existent, they would be incapable of being influenced by anything, interacting with anything, relying upon anything, joining with anything or anyone, or functioning in any way. Everything in the universe, including consciousness, if it were independently self-existent, would be immovable, frozen in separateness, isolated, inactive, ineffectual, and without potential. Now, if you look at the state of depression, that kind of describes it. When somebody turns in on themselves and sort of gives up and says, nothing matters, nothing at all matters, I don't even care about myself or anything. This is where it goes. It goes to these states, frozen in separateness, isolated, inactive, ineffectual, without potential. That's kind of a definition of depression. Of nihilism, really. Depression is heading towards nihilism, and it's a very dangerous place for the consciousness to go to. And so we need to work against that tendency some of us may have to go there, and keep up this enthusiasm. Keep our enthusiasm for continuing to investigate this path that the Buddha has presented. Not having to take it as a gospel, but to take it as hypothesis, to take it the way he presented to us, saying, you check it out for yourself. This is what I found. Check it out. Try it out. To try it out the way he said, and do that. That's what we need to do. So let me see. But if we observe the world, and this is how you can pull yourself out of depression, I think, if you want to. If we actually observe the world, even everything around us that we see, like in our little 3D boom, boom, boom out there, we'll see that the opposite of that is true. Things are influenced by other things. They do interact with one another, rely upon one another, and join with other phenomena in cycles of new creative and destructive combinations constantly. The observable universe is teeming with movement and change, interdependent life forms, activities, and consciousnesses, causes and effects, new ideas, and unlimited potential for all possibilities within the framework of dependent arising. And if one wanted to, one could put the label God on top of that, with that particular definition of being the supreme and ultimate reality. Once you get into different definitions, then you get back down into independent self-existence. This being independently self-exists somewhere out there, up there, in there, I don't know. Or even down there, because if you start to think, well, this theology where you have a God, you have an independent self-existing creator God who created everything in his image, and then you've got this opponent called the devil. Well, who made that? Who created that? Who created this evil thing? None of it's logical. The logic falls to pieces as soon as you begin to question, but we're taught to be afraid to question. And we shouldn't be afraid to question.
Burned at the stake.
Well, and that would teach you, right? That would teach you damn quick. I'm keeping my mouth shut.
I mean,
about that.
we still have contemporary burning at the stake for asking
have
that
that.
question.
For asking those questions. It still exists.
It looks different.
Yeah.
You get canceled or
Yeah,
fired or.
yeah, I know. Yeah. Where are we now? I probably won't be able to go into the next thing. Oh, yeah. Yes, I should go into the next stage. I will. I think there's time for this. Okay. There is a third option about beginningless time. It is a decidedly illogical option. However, it's an option that comes up. So here's the third option. The one was, there's a first cause and we keep going around in circles. It's impossible. How can there be a first cause? It has to be a beginning. Here's the third option. Can a first cause arise from nothingness? Again, these are all my thoughts here. Perhaps the thought could come to one's mind that it may be possible for a first cause to arise from nothing. A decidedly illogical explanation for a first cause is that it arises out of nothingness, as if it just popped into existence out of nowhere of its own accord, volition, and autonomy. Nothingness, if you look in the dictionary, means non-existence. Non-existence is, if you look in the dictionary, the negation of being. It is logically impossible for a first cause to arise from non-existent nothingness, because nothing comes from nothing. Non-existence does not produce existence. For something to be non-existent, it must consider, and this now comes from, I was looking at articles about physics and quantum physics, string theory, stuff like this. And this is leading to this. For something to be non-existent, it must consist of no space, no time, no energy, no particles, no fields, and no laws of nature. One would have to also include, and even some of the scientists are saying this now, one would also have to include no consciousness in this mix, because consciousness is what makes an awareness or experience of existence possible. It is only through consciousness that anything can even be postulated to exist. I mean, it's so clearly obvious, yeah.
So this is trying to get back so that I understand the terms correctly, so that
Okay.
I don't confuse myself. If the ultimate nature of reality is emptiness, but there's all these things around us, didn't these things evolve from emptiness?
That's why we have to clarify these terms precisely.
Right.
Emptiness means the lack of any kind of independent self-existence. That is a negation. What that negation is affirming, that things do exist dependently. They exist as dependent arisings, causes and conditions coming into, constantly coming in to being and out of being and in and out and in and out. This explains everything we see. Everything that appears to us is due to the emptiness of any kind of independent self-existence and the affirmation of everything is dependently arising. It doesn't exist independently.
Yeah, that's Jay Tsongkhapa, one of his, that's a key thing at the end of
Yeah,
Three Principal Paths, where, because a lot of times when you hear emptiness, we go to nothingness, so it's like, well, if everything's empty, nothing can exist, or come or arise, and it's like, no, because everything is empty, things
That's
can
why.
arise, and
Exactly.
they're two sides of the same coin. Nothing could work or appear or exist, or
it takes
for that negation.
It takes a while,
That's tough.
Kevin, for our minds to sort of see what it is the Buddha is saying, what the Buddha is actually negating with the term emptiness. It's a negation of anything being independently self-existent, cut off unto itself, not depending on anything or interacting with it. Because that's what
Okay, so
That would
to
mean-
more directly addressing Kevin's question, then a quick answer would be. Things are arising from within a giant field of dependent arising mush. Like a hash that's perpetually and infinite.
So here we go.
Beginning.
Because this is where I'm headed with it, and we're gonna have to end. We won't be able to go to the great analogy, but we'll do it next time. All right, it's nothingness. So we're saying if there's nothing, you can't even postulate consciousness, right? And that without consciousness, nothing could, how could even anything exist? This does not mean, however, that something couldn't appear to come from nowhere. Buddhism accepts multiple dimensions in which consciousnesses and particles of energy in a multiplicity of forms can exist. Just because we can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It goes back to we don't know what we don't know. Now, current findings in physics directly point to this phenomenon. Quantum physics has shown that particles can move from one location to another instantaneously without existing anywhere in between. String theory helps to explain how this works. Say a particle, and we're talking subatomic particles. Say a particle wiggles from the third dimension into the fourth dimension. Once it's in the fourth dimension, it's outside of our awareness because we are in the third dimension. Eventually, it wiggles back into our three-dimensional world in a different location, and we see it again. Does that mean it became nothing and later became something again? If that particle is merely unobservable, who's to say that it's nothing? And this is where physics is going.
Who is to say?
Who is to say that it's nothing? And the experiments that they are doing are sort of bearing this out. So it could be possible that it would seem like something just popped into existence out of nowhere. Oh my God, where did that UFO come from? You know, that must be the first cause. Which some people think. Some people actually think this all happened because of space aliens and UFOs.
Yeah, I do.
But you can't, you're not going far enough. Where did they come from? You know? And it's possible that all of these things can exist in different dimensions that we're not even aware of because we don't have the equipment to see it, and we're not in the particular dimension that we can see it. It's the same, it's why it's like, right now, we've talked about this before, right now, all this Wi-Fi is just streaming through this room, and it's affecting everything. Our phones are picking it up, you know, but we don't see it. We don't see it at all. We believe it's there because we can see the little box that it's supposed to be coming out of, and we can see the effect that it's having, and all of the science is telling us that this is so, but we don't see it. Somebody who didn't know anything about this would think, wow, that's just like magic. And in a way, it is like magic. But it's not magic. There is a cause to it. It doesn't appear to us. We see the effect of it. So something could seem to pop into existence out of nowhere, and somebody could say, oh, that's the first cause. But that's not, that's not really what logic would say, because nothing can come out of nothingness. It just doesn't work that way.
I know you talked about like the Big Bang.
Yeah.
I mean, what is, I mean, the Buddhist ideology or, I mean,
Buddhism actually has absolutely no problem with the Big Bang, just none at all. I mean, the Big Bang was postulated by Hindus long before our current science talked about. Hinduism has a view of Big Bang, which Buddhism would agree with. Hinduism said, and current science is getting there too. Buddhism and Hinduism would say that everything in the universe, it sort of explodes out of a very small thing. Because if you think about it, science is now talking about this. If you think about the amount of space and then the particles that are, in between all of that space, all of those particles can be condensed down into a very, very small thing. I think that could say the size of a peach, they think. And that will remain, and what the Hindus will say is that universes explode and they have a particular life form and then they implode. This is ancient Hinduism, and Buddhism will agree with this. And then they implode and they go into sort of like a period of dormancy. And then at that period of dormancy, they then explode again. And so that right there, you then can go, beginningless time fits into that.
maybe that's what black holes are, is the
Right,
explosion.
they could be the implosion, right?
I think it would be like a Big Bang, not the Big Bang.
Right.
It would be a secret.
Right.
So what Buddhism would say is,
All these separate.
Yeah, or a sequence of.
I think what the Dalai Lama said is, he was posed the same question. He said, I don't have a problem with the Big Bang at all. It's just not the first Big Bang. There's just endless series of this going on.
I forgot all the terms, but it's like not a cold star, dwarf star, something like that. And you're right, like they say that it's so like a nuclear,
Right. It's
explosion.
so, yeah, and it's apparently very hot and all this. I mean, that's what they're process. Okay, we're gonna have to close it and go to our closing prayers.
Okay, don't forget to be nice.
Don't forget to be good and say your prayers.
No, be kind and nice. In addition to all this thinking, don't forget to be kind and nice.
Yeah,
That's why we're doing all this thing.
I know.
that's right. But you're right. You're absolutely, that's the whole purpose of all this logic and all this thinking is this, So our experience and everyone else's experience of everything can be better. Can be,
We wanna be
Happy.
the person our dogs imagine us to be, I think.
yeah, our dogs and cats, right? Okay. Well, Brian, we've come a long way, right? We wouldn't even be sitting here. This is what I always tell myself. We wouldn't even be sitting here listening to this if we hadn't done something in the past that made us be even interested in anything like this. So I don't think we should be too down on ourselves. I think maybe that flash of emptiness can happen anytime. We just, we may be more ready than we think. So. Okay. Dedication prayers, let's see. Let's go down, let's do the same thing we do, read them in English. Down at the bottom of the page that has a 7-limb prayer on it, the bottom two. May the precious Bodhi mind, that awakened heart and mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the view of emptiness, the correct view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And now, without our teachers, without the lineage coming down from the Buddha and then directly crossing the ocean and getting to us, without those lamas, we would not have any of this information. We would not be able to even be talking about this. So here's the final dedication. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoying the splendor of Dharma, fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths, may I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. And Vajradhara is just the potential within us to attain that state of enlightenment. You have that potential. It's part of what consciousness is. Dependent arising. Dependent arising used for the purpose of enlightenment will get you there. It will get you there.
Let all the people say.
Let all the people say, amen.